Okay, everybody. Good morning to all participants. Good morning to people in Europe and Africa, and good afternoon to the participants in Asia. I am very happy to welcome you to this webinar where we celebrate the 50th anniversary of UNESCO's Man and the Biosphere program, the MAB program. This visionary program started way back in 1971 and is now more relevant than ever. Today, we will explore why and how. My name is Inger Elisabeth Moren, and I hold the UNESCO Chair on Sustainable Heritage and Environmental Management here at the University of Bergen in Norway. We celebrate the contribution of research to the evolution of the MAB program by featuring exciting presentations on current research in biosphere reserves in various parts of the globe. We also facilitate a conversation between sustainability scientists and MAB program experts to discuss future pathways for sustainability science, actionable knowledge, and how to close the science policy gap for a more sustainable future. For those of you that are not familiar with the MAB program and its associated World Network of Biosphere Reserves, we can shortly summarize that there are altogether 714 biosphere reserves in 129 countries around the globe, and 21 of these are transboundary. We are covering all major ecosystems in the world, and combined these areas cover an area the size of Australia, or approximately 5% of Earth's surface, which is a rather large chunk. And 225 million people live within these biosphere reserves. And then further, I can tell you that Brazil has the largest area of biosphere reserves, while Costa Rica has the highest proportion of land as a biosphere reserve designation, a total of 52% actually, and Spain the highest number of biosphere reserves with a total number of 52, which is a lot of biospheres within one country. Here in Norway, we have one single biosphere reserve, and it was newly designated in 2019. And what exactly is a biosphere, you might ask? And I'll say biosphere reserves are learning places or model areas for sustainable development. Very shortly summarized. But of course, today we will dive into examples and hear a lot more about both the MAB program and the World Network of Biosphere Reserves. So after lunch, we will work collaboratively together in a horizon scanning workshop to envision the future of science in biosphere reserves. With me here today, I have Jared Cousins, who will keep an eye on the student chat and answer questions and comments as we go along. And Alethea Barklow, she will be the timekeeper through the morning session, and she'll notify speakers when they have about 3 minutes left. And we will be a little strict because we have a quite dense program to get through today. Alethea will also lead the afternoon workshop. And I will ask you to please use the Q&A function. You see the Q&A in the menu below you here in Zoom to ask questions. And if time permits, the speakers can address them here and now, or if we don't have time, we can answer them later in the chat. And I'll ask all speakers to have their slides ready to share, so we save a little bit of time with that. We will start this morning off with 3 talks with a global focus, and then we'll continue with examples of exciting new research in different biosphere reserves around the globe. And I'm very happy to introduce the first speaker of the day, Miriam Boumeran. She is the Chief of Section on MAB Research and Policy, Ecology and Biodiversity at the UNESCO headquarters in Paris. And we're very excited to have you along on this celebration, because of course you are an expert and an inspiration when it comes to developing the MAB program further. So please, Miriam, the floor is yours. We see your slides, but maybe yes, the sound is muted.
Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Sorry about that. Very nice to see you too. And thank you very much for the invitation, Inger. And it's nice to see some familiar faces. Happy birthday for everybody that is part of the MAB family. Brand new or since many years, maybe 50 years? No, I don't think so. I wanted to reflect with you today, this year that we are celebrating our 50 years. We have a lot to share, and I'm sure we will hear from other speakers about some lessons and some achievements. But I wanted also to reflect on what has happened over the last year in this planet of ours, our unique planet, and what it means for our program, the MAB program, and all the community that is making it alive and dynamic since 50 years. In this time of transformation, I think it was good for me to start to reflect on what the MAB has brought, in my opinion, as UNESCO, and also what it can bring now, and continue to bring maybe in the next 50 years. We've been going through a very difficult time, and we are starting to breathe a little bit, at least in Paris. I hope that wherever you are, you have this light coming up after the tunnel. But we really think that this is a big time of transformation. And the big transformation is both within us and with each other and with the other living species. And what we've been reflecting here in the MAB Secretariat and in UNESCO is really about the shift that needs to be done to completely transform the way we inhabit Earth together and our relationship with nature and the other living species. And this is our belief that the MAB program has a lot to bring in this time of transformation, and a lot to share with beyond its community, within its community, of course, but beyond its community. We did reflect about what UNESCO can bring, because there are many players, many stakeholders, many people, and working on that, which is a good news. It's a good news for us that many people are engaged into the reconciliation with biodiversity and taking seriously sustainable development. But what we did a mapping, and we see that a lot of NGOs or UN partners or colleagues are working more on saving the planet, whereas in UNESCO we think that the planet is going to be okay without us. It's more about how we are going to save ourselves and make sure that we really stop destroying and stop making our own diseases and our own, I'm losing the word this morning, but unhappiness, I would say. And so it was interesting for us to see that next year, when we were starting to negotiate for all the CBD and the post-2020, that we wanted to be more into this part, that we wanted to make sure that, because, for example, in the MAB program since 50 years, we really have put the human dimension at the heart of the interaction between people and ecosystems and biodiversity and the species. And we have values in UNESCO, but also in the MAB program, that have demonstrated that it is already possible in key ecosystems in everywhere in the planet to really have sound and sustainable relationship with the living. So we would like to share with you some of our thoughts about this. And the key message that we have, and we have been working in UNESCO, all the sector, education, science, culture, and of course with the MAB as a flagship, about positioning UNESCO clearly. And these are the three pillars that we have elaborated for our strategy that is being now examined by our member states. And we will have a general conference in October, November, possibly hybrid or completely virtual, where the member states of UNESCO, more than 190, are going to discuss and approve our next strategy for the next 8 years until 2030, where we are supposed to have implemented the SDGs. So the three pillars are about regenerating our relationship with nature, restoring our relationship, not only the ecosystems, but also our values, our relationship. Whenever it works well, and in the MAP program, we have very good practices and examples and biosphere reserves where it's possible to conserve the harmony of the ecosystems, again, the interaction between people and nature. And we really want to highlight and share those practices and those solutions and those actions, and again, go beyond the boundaries of the biosphere reserves. And the third pillar is really empowering the youth people so they can really make sure that that they are part of the transformation and the change that we are calling upon. Really actors of change. And this is something also I think that the MAB is leading versus other programs in UNESCO, where the MAB youth really have a strong role to play and are really active in our network. Sorry. So what is really important for us is to see that with what happened with the COVID-19 and the crisis and everywhere in the planet, how can the MAB be not only celebrating 50 years and opening all its research and knowledge beyond its boundary, but also what is going to be the role of the MAB program and the biosphere reserves in the coming months and years. We see there are different forces happening now that some people are really eager to come back to what was before or to continue and go back to shop and to consume and to produce. Some others are saying this is really important to use this momentum to really completely change the way we inhabit Earth and we consume and we produce, and that it's a breakthrough in our consciousness, in our awareness about our relationship. So what is it that the MAP can do? How can we build on what we have learned over the last 50 years? And how can we give hope and direction and show that it's possible, that it's happening already everywhere in the planet, in every ecosystem, that it's not an utopia, that it is something that many stakeholders are engaged into since many years, from the private sector to the citizens, to the researcher community, to governments, local municipalities. How can we make that more known and also inspire people, if they want to follow us or to support us or to try on their own community and in their own ecosystems to be actors of change and this transformation? This is why we have built again, and we have done lots of webinars because of the COVID situation, of course, but also to continue to be these lighthouses in difficult times in the MAP program within UNESCO and also beyond UNESCO, to really demonstrate that there are challenges, but there are also opportunities. And the opportunities is really, again, to reshape our relationship with the living everywhere in the planet, what we do and what we demonstrate in the biosphere reserves, and that there are already ways that we can be part of this life that is among us, within us and outside of us, and use the biosphere reserves as those places where we can really demonstrate what is sustainable development by sharing our values. And I come back to the values, and I come back to the shift, the transformation of behaviors and of thinking our role as humans in this planet now. And these are the 4 values that have been worked on within the community of the MAP program, and that are coming from the community, from the Biosphere Reserve, from the MAB committee. Celebrate life. I think that it was even more important to show how life is crucial. And this is our motto for the celebration. It's about life. And maybe this COVID-19 crisis has helped us to reflect on what is really essential, what is really important, what is, dear to us, our loved one, our friends, maybe in connection to nature. I'm living in Paris, and it was really, really difficult to stay in an apartment for many months without being able to go out and see nature. It's about empowering people, again, including the youth, but also creating a movement where people think that they can be actor of change and they can really have a role to play. Not only to rely on the government or on decisions from outside stakeholders, but that our way of living and consuming and producing can really make a change. Provide and share solutions. We have many stories and many solutions that were innovative and shared and created in the Biosphere Reserve. So how do we share that and see if this is upscaled elsewhere? And we are a community, and I think this COVID-19 also showed that we are all connected, all interdependent with each other, but also with the other living species. And how do we inspire, and how do we make what is happening in the Biosphere Reserves, what we do since 50 years, how can we share that now in this time of transformation? Again, with the MAB program being the flagship, the leader in implementing the 3 pillars I mentioned about, the 3 actions from the whole overall UNESCO strategy on biodiversity. How do we store the relationship? What are the values everywhere in every countries, every culture? What are the values that are respectful of the living, respectful of biodiversity? How do we regenerate ecosystems? We have success stories in some biosphere reserve where we were able to stop destroying biodiversity and restoring mangrove forest ecosystems. How do we show to the world and inspire them that it is not too late, it is possible? How do we conserve the harmony? What are the tips? What are the ways that we can develop, thrive without destroying nature? What did we learn since 50 years? And what can we share? And again, for the future generation, not only talking about them like they are virtual, they are here with us and they are demonstrating in the streets. Well, they were at least before the COVID, but they are still going on. They are calling us to do something. So why don't we engage with them? And how do we engage with them now so we can listen to their ideas, their suggestions, and their different values? Very interesting to see that many of them don't want to have a job that is going to destroy nature. They don't want to have a job that is making other human beings slave or have a bad salary. They want to have more balance between their private life and their work life. And for example, here at UNESCO, we had to telework. It's going to bring some changes in the way we work together and the way we invest our time in meaningful and essential things for us. So the call for UNESCO using the Biosphere Reserve, and when I reflect back on, maybe some of you know about this exhibition that UNESCO MAB has done some decades ago, with the jar, where the vision is about conserving in protected area. And this is what the post-2020 negotiation in Kunming in China are a bit advocating, that we have to put aside 30% of the planet in protected areas. What is happening with the rest? What is happening with the 70%? Are we going to continue to destroy? Or are we going to really change and transform our relationship with each other and with nature? So 100% of the humanity is feeling responsible and concerned and acting, not only relying on, again, on NGOs or protected area to solve the issue. It's a big shift of behaviors, of values, of norms that we are working on. I really think that this ecology in action, where you break the jar and show that, nature is, we are part of nature. We are completely part of nature and connected to each other. Nature is not to feel in a separated places where humans live elsewhere. We have to think how we can together, using the MAP program and all these biosphere reserves that are about reconciliation between people and nature. We have cities in urban biosphere reserve. We have people living in big cities, like in Dublin Bay, It's a capital city. So how can we contribute to inspire that it is possible everywhere in the planet? And this is why we have launched several events this year, and we want to continue until the COP15 and beyond, until Stockholm plus 50 next year in Sweden. We want to show at UNESCO, and with the MAB program as a flagship in the coming months and years, that it's possible to reconcile with nature. It's possible to do it now. It's possible to share all our stories in the Biosphere Reserves and build on our values and show that these values can be transformed into actions, upscaled actions, and that we can be a platform that is mobilizing and empowering everybody and making sure that this issue is not only our issue, it's everybody's issue, and it's everybody's concern and everybody's future, that we take care of biodiversity and the ecosystems where we are on this planet. There is just one planet. This is the planet we are living in and living in together. It's our common home. And I think that it's really time, like the UN Secretary General said, to make peace with nature and to see how the MAB program in the coming months and years is going to help to change the narrative where humans are not anymore destroying nature and biodiversity, altering it, like it best said, but that we are becoming custodians, that we are becoming guardians of the living. And I really hope that MAB can help to build this narrative today with all of you and in the coming months. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Great. You have really outlined the vision of the future of the MAB program. Let's see if we have any raised hands or a question. No, I don't think so, but I have a question. You talked about youth as actors of change and how important they are in shaping the future. And I'm wondering, what is UNESCO doing to facilitate this and facilitate their voices? Can you say something shortly about that?
Yes, so it's one of our global priority at UNESCO, the youth, and very specifically in the MAB program, they have, but I think Alicia can better say that to me. I think I would rather that Alicia says what she does, because she's one of the spokesperson instead of me speaking on behalf of the youth. I think this is not empowering. So if you allow it, I think Alicia can answer that question very well for the MAB program. But again, for the whole UNESCO, it is a global priority, and all the sectors have to involve them at the different programs, not only to invite them to be on the podium, but really to make them actors and leader of each program. But I prefer Alicia speaks, as she's much younger than me, I think. I'm not sure.
Thanks, Miriam. Thanks, Miriam. Well, good morning. Yes, so as Miriam said, there are very active youth networks within the MAB program, and I think MAB has done a really amazing job in the last 3 or 4 years to facilitate youth participation with the organization of these MAB youth forums that have resulted in youth networks that meet regularly on a regional basis and also on a global basis, and propose activities and have quite a close relationship with the different MAB secretariats. And this is something that is still growing and becoming established, but it's I think it's going very well, and has resulted in a lot of positive experiences for a lot of young people living in biosphere reserves. So I think also as a timekeeper, I can see that we're coming up to 9:30. So thank you, Miriam, so much. And I think we will now switch to Martin Price, who I see is already with us.
Yes, Martin Price. He's a professor emeritus from MAB UK and also the founding director of the Centre of Mountain Studies at the University of Highlands and Islands in Scotland. He's also a former UNESCO chair. So please, Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Inge. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. And you can see my screen?
Yes.
Good. Okay, everything is fine then. Right, well, thank you very much. It's good to see all these names and faces from around the world, and I hope I will bring some useful context, maybe adding to Miriam's inspirational presentation to start with, because I'm going to be looking back, well, and then thinking a bit towards the future, although I think we've had a excellent vision from Miriam. So this is kind of more of a review of the last 50 years, quite a few of which I have been involved with, but I was still a master's. No, I wasn't. I was in high school when the program began. So this is the title, and just to, here we go. Oops. I have to, yeah, there we go. Okay, so the themes of the presentation. First, the MAB program is one of UNESCO's intergovernmental science programs, and I think it's important to remember that throughout, and especially in the context of this seminar, this webinar today. And why am I focusing on mountains? Well, apart from the fact they cover a good part, about a quarter of the Earth's land surface, they were a major theme for the MAB program in its first 2 decades, and they have, at the moment, they constitute 2/3 of biosphere reserves are in mountains, and you can see the graph on the bottom right, which will be in a paper to be published this year as part of a special issue on mountains and biosphere reserves to link to the 50th anniversary. And of course, I work in mountains. So some bit of history. So back in the early 70s, the MAB program established 13 and eventually 14 project areas. One of those was about mountains, and one of those was about the conservation of natural resources and of the genetic material they contain. And out of that came biosphere reserves, and they were mentioned from pretty much the beginning. So looking back historically, these are the 2 strands that I will be exploring today, and I'm kind of weaving between one and the other. In the 1970s and 1980s, the project on mountains was, as you see the title here, on the impact of human activities on mountain and tundra ecosystems. And back in 1973, there was the definition by a working group. And if you see on the right-hand side, it was actually in Lillehammer, the key meeting in Norway. They defined these, what they call problem areas. And this was really the way of thinking in science at the time. We have to solve the problems. So first looking at tropical mountain regions, temperate mountains, and high latitude mountain and tundra ecosystems. And this group also recognized there was a need for comparative worldwide research activities. And I guess what I should say is, okay, I'm focusing on mountains, but there were similar developments for all sorts of other MAB programs. I can only focus on one now because A, time, and B, we can't look at the whole MAB program in such a short time. So those were the areas, and just very briefly, these are some key activities, and then I will look at some outcomes. So in the temperate mountains, there were activities in many European countries, especially the Alps, Central Europe, not much in Norway, I should say, but also in Australia, New Zealand, and the USA. The research was, a lot of it, quite disciplinary, although there were strong calls for multi and interdisciplinary research, and there was some. And there was some beginnings. Remember, we are looking back some decades of modeling and geographic information systems. And I would say, importantly, there was a lot of what we would now call knowledge transfer. There were many meetings so that the people working in these different places would talk to each other and share their experiences and their knowledge. And the 2 pictures, one of them, the graphical one on the left, this was really the sort of state of the art at the beginning of the late 1980s. The idea at the bottom of the picture of a small mountain area with people living in it, going up to the mountains, and then the different levels of interaction and different models, which were then put into different sorts of systems. I'm not going to go into this. This just started developing in the Swiss MAB program and then was further evolved in Germany. All of this work is summarized in a book that I published back in 1995. So in the temperate mountains, there was quite a lot of work, quite a lot of meetings. In the subtropical and tropical mountains, there were a number of there's quite a lot of work going on in different places. In the Andes, there was some really very useful work bringing together all the knowledge across the Andes, which was really trend-setting at the time. In the early, they were published in 1991 to 4, but the work was done far before that. And then many national projects. In Asia, there was a meeting in 1975 bringing together people, which led to the establishment of ICIMOD, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, in 1983, which continues and is a very important organization because, and I think this is one of the big legacies we could say of MAB, because although, as you know, the Himalaya includes countries that don't always talk to each other and are sometimes at war, at ICIMOD you find scientists from all those countries working together, and they have been since 1983. There have been many national projects, and there have been also links to other projects by other UN organizations. And I think that's another important point to make, is that MAB doesn't work on its own and never has done. It's always been working with other UN organizations. In Africa, there were national projects, and there was the establishment at a meeting in 1986 of an African Mountains Association. So again, science was going on, but also there was a lot of connections going on. And so just a summary of this work in the 1970s and 1980s within what was called MAB 6, the Mountain Program. Most of the activities were at the national level. Some were multidisciplinary, but most were quite narrowly focused. Lots of meetings, lots of institutions, and I've mentioned the second and the third, but the first of those was the International Mountain Society, which publishes the journal Mountain Research and Development, which has been the preeminent mountain journal since then and still continues, although now online. And so really this program, this work within MAB was a major catalyst for mountain science. And I've just mentioned at the bottom, as you may remember, I said that there was a call for integrated global mountain research. That didn't actually happen until the establishment of the Mountain Research Initiative in 2001. So that was mountains in this first period of the MAB program, which generally was very much devoted to science, scientific research, lots and lots of books published, lots of papers published, lots of collaboration. But in the same period, biosphere reserves were becoming more and more a focus of the program. In the 1980s, the Scientific Advisory Panel on Biosphere Reserve defined what we now know as the 3 functions of biosphere reserves: conservation, development, and the so-called logistic function: research, monitoring, education, and training. And the 3 zones. This is a recent graphic of the 3 zones, which I'm sure you all know, with the core area, the buffer zones, and the transition area. And I'm not going to go in detail because I suspect most of you know a lot of the detail about this. And in 1988, it was recognized that biosphere reserves were not just places to, or could be not just places for working on these 3 functions, but could be parts of a global network of what was called Geosphere Biosphere Observatories. And this was at the time when the concept of global change was emerging and becoming very much recognized, leading to the International Geosphere Biosphere Program and the International Human Dimensions Program, now joined up as Future Earth. So biosphere reserves were recognized as places for doing really useful research, which would inform our knowledge of the global system, even back in 1988 and before, I should say. And in the 1990s, there was a proposal to look at what was going on in biosphere reserves through monitoring that came out of EuroMAB in 1991. But as you can see for this, a survey looking at the biosphere reserves in 1992 showed that most of these data were from the natural sciences, and it wasn't until the 2000s, in 2001, that there was a workshop on social monitoring in biosphere reserves that recognized the importance of people within biosphere reserves and the need to look at what people were doing in biosphere reserves. And this links back to the history of the biosphere reserves as a whole. And again, many of you will know that in 1996 was a seminal conference 25 years ago this year, which said that of the existing at that time 337 biosphere reserves, and now we have more than double that, about a half of those were purely a national park with something around it, with a very strong conservation and ecological focus. But at the same time, at that meeting came out two important documents, the Several Strategy and the Statutory Framework. And the vision of the strategy includes these 2 points and many others, but to look really at the science and the people aspects. And the statutory framework, the key for me phrase for what is a biosphere reserve is that they should be sites of excellence to explore, which I've underlined, and demonstrate approaches to conservation and sustainable development on a regional scale. And this is still the fundamental document for the MAB program. And that word explore, I think, is a really important one, as well as the demonstration, which I think is what Miriam has particularly emphasized today. Back to mountains. Well, I mentioned global change, and in mountains, there was a focus on global change in mountain biosphere reserves in the early 2000s. I won't go through all the details in this because I see my timing is running, but the point is that there was a big project funded by the EU and also with MAB support, with all sorts of conferences and meetings, developing a research strategy, which then led to another small project on biosphere reserves, mountain biosphere reserves, and global change. So the idea of global change, which includes climate change, demographic change, biodiversity change, and so on, has been very much looked at from the perspective of the MAB program for a long time.
You have 3 minutes, Martin. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm coming to the end. Thank you. So moving back 5 years ago, it seems a long time, 5 years, but anyway, a lot has happened in that time. So in 2016, the Lima Congress, there was a workshop on mountains, which recognized there was a lot of research in biosphere reserves, but again, still, even now in the 2010s, mainly on the biophysical aspects, but including a lot on climate change, but little on the socioeconomic aspects. And therefore, there was a need to try and bring together the people working in biosphere reserves, the scientists working in and with biosphere reserves, to exchange information, experiences, and work together. And if you look at this in the context of the MAB program as a whole, you can see a lot of focus on the models for sustainable development, the communication, the sustainable development goals, and in particular, biodiversity and climate change. This strategic objective, looking at biodiversity and sustainability science, education for sustainable development, and also this idea of an establishment of an international network of scientists working in, and I would say with, biosphere reserves. And again, the Lima Action Plan published in Lima speaks about such a network of scientists and all sorts of aspects on research, observation, and again, research and monitoring. So there's a lot about science in the plans, the strategy for the MAB program, looking ahead at the moment only till 2025, but I'm sure it will be again in the future. And for mountains, this network of biosphere reserves will be relaunched soon. Some of you may know about this. I'm not going to go through the points here, but again, there's a lot of focus on the research, the exchanges, so the collaboration, research, citizen science, and bringing in the necessary support to make it all happen. So some final thoughts. Well, as I started at the beginning, the MAB program is an intergovernmental science program. It's not an intergovernmental sites program like World Heritage and like global geoparks within UNESCO. It's different. And it's also important to think about this idea of sites of excellence for not just demonstrating approaches to conservation and sustainable development, but exploring them. And that's, I think, the role for scientists. At the moment, we have a global network of biosphere reserves and many regional and some thematic networks, but we don't have a network of MAB scientists. And I believe that there's a huge amount of science going on within biosphere reserves and for biosphere reserves, but the scientists are not connecting to each other as much as they could be, and I would suggest ought to be, to fulfill many of the points of the vision that Mary-Em presented earlier. And really, we need to look at science with and for biosphere reserves and all their stakeholders. And back to the exploration theme, I just put up on the right-hand side the website for the International Journal of UNESCO Biosphere Reserves. That's one method for sharing the experience, but I'd say we've got a lot to do, and I look forward to discussing it in the next few hours about how to really bring the scientists together with and for biosphere reserves, not just working in one biosphere reserve and another, but actually looking at what are the synergies that we can look at globally, because that's where MAB was at the very beginning. I think that's where MAB should be going again, and that will be key to answering and working on many points of the vision that Mary-Em put forward earlier. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. Very insightful talk. Thanks. We will move on to the last global perspective, and this is presented by Lisen Schultz. She's the Deputy Director of Transdisciplinarity at the Stockholm Resilience Center at Stockholm University, and our very own Alethea Barraclough, which is a postdoc fellow of the UNESCO chair here in Bergen. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Inger, and thank you everyone who are behind this brilliant seminar. It's been lovely to listen both to Mary-Em and Martin. And me and Alethea decided that I was going to share my screen and I was going to begin talking, and then I'll hand over to you, Alethea. Because this is really a collaborative project that started already back in 2008. It's a global survey on management and governance and outcomes in biosphere reserves. And this picture here is from Kristianstads Vattenrike Biosphere in southern Sweden, where I started my PhD studies. And at that time, my studies were part of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, and we were looking at what ecosystem services were present in this area and who were the managers behind these services, and how had this collaborative management structure that they had in place here in Kristianstad emerged, and how was it sustained, and what were the outcomes. And in this place, we found that people were working in a very adaptive and collaborative way. So we coined, or we named this governance approach to ecosystems by adaptive co-management. And then during this time, when I presented this work in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which was really a global program, people from other regions in the world would say, well, that sounds all nice, and maybe it works in a democratic, high-income country like Sweden, but what about the rest of the world? And then this area became a biosphere reserve during my PhD studies, which then opened up this possibility of actually comparing experiences in Kristianstads Vattenrike to, by then there were just above 500 sites across the world in the World Network. So this was an amazing opportunity for me during my PhD studies. And I was fortunate to go to this World Congress of Biosphere Reserves in Madrid 2008, and we met there, Mary-Em, and I got 2 minutes on stage to present this global survey that I had then developed, drawing on the experiences in Kristianstad and trying to understand what are the ways in which people work in these biosphere reserves across the globe. Basically, what works, where, and why. which is of course very difficult to understand just through a questionnaire. But if you're going to try and compare 500 sites, that's what you have to rely on. You can't do year-long case studies in each of the biosphere reserves. Anyways, I worked very hard here with, as you can see, papers and also an online component, and really hunted down people on this congress to get the responses in this quite long questionnaire. And in the end, I got 146 responses that we could use. And we covered all of the regions, so that was really nice. And we were able to develop a few quite nice papers. One looking at the role of participation in the governance of biosphere reserves, where there had been this discussion in conservation science on what it means to involve local stakeholders. Would that be a compromise then to biodiversity, or would it enhance biodiversity, and so on? And we could find here that the more adaptive co-management you do, the more likely you are to actually be able to meet both the conservation goals and the sustainable development goals. So we couldn't find any evidence that it would be bad to engage local stakeholders. On the opposite, it had some good outcomes. And then we did the survey again in 2013. This time we had a much bigger research group, and we tried by phone to get all of the 146 biosphere reserves that had participated in the first survey to take it again. We ended up reaching 92, which is a good number, considering that these people are of course spread all over the world. And there we looked more specifically at the relationship between stakeholder participation and legitimacy. And we found that there is definitely a link there, but actually it's not the case that always the more participation, the more legitimacy. It's always about tailoring the governance and management and participation structures to the context of this particular biosphere reserve and this particular issue that you're working on. These are just some examples of what we can do with this survey, but what it also includes is there are a few components. One is understanding the governance arrangement, so who is involved in what kinds of activities. Another part is about the performance, so how well are you achieving your goals regarding biodiversity conservation, sustainable development, and learning or logistics, these three functions that Martin described. We're also looking into what are the values in this biosphere reserves that you're trying to maintain, and what are the threats that you see, and also what are your needs. So I think that now that we are actually doing this again, and here is where I will hand over to Alithia, I think we will be able to have a really beautiful data set and provide some of that scientific aspect to the MAB program that Martin is calling for, because I think that is really the role of us as scientists, to help these biosphere reserves to generalize lessons learned, to build theory, and to inform the rest of the world who are not biosphere reserves. So thank you, and over to you, Alithia.
Thanks, Jason. So we're really lucky in our UNESCO chair group and me as a postdoc there to be able to work with this data set that Lisen worked so hard to generate. And so now we are redoing the same survey again. And that gives us a really nice kind of long time series from more than 10 years following the same biosphere reserves, which gives us a really unique insight into the network. And so we've been repeating the survey from the beginning of the year. And that's fine. And so we have now 60 biosphere reserves that have responded. And I really have to thank also Marie, who's with us today as well, and as one of the co-hosts, who has really helped to collect some of these responses, and we're hoping to continue collecting until the end of the year. And so next slide, thanks. So I think in addition to kind of having, as Lisen was saying, this perspective into the governance structure and the participation and the values, I was also wondering when when we decided to continue this project, how else can we complete the picture that, this really rich picture that we kind of get of who's involved in the governance, what are the values, how can we add to it? And I think something that I thought would be interesting would be that, we have this really interesting perspective from the managers of the biosphere reserves of how their performance is and how well they're doing in the different objectives. And I thought it would be very interesting to complement this with some biophysical measurements, and some really looking into biodiversity and whether we can actually see, through some biophysical measurements, if there are some measurable effects on biodiversity, which is something that I'm specifically quite passionate about. So next slide, please. And so I think what we want to do is to create this picture where we have this time aspect in the center, which is really, really unique and useful. We have this 10-year time series, and then we have this component here of people's participation, so who's being involved, and then we have this top component of this adaptive co-management, of this learning and feedback into the system. And then I wanted to help us complete the picture by also kind of seeing whether we see any of these changes reflected in the landscapes, measured in these new ways that we have. So next slide. So I think something quite exciting that has happened since Lisen started the survey is that the data availability to be able to look at these biophysical changes has really increased, right? Like we have so much more data available now to be able to see, for example, if there's been any change in the landscape, that we can look at through land use or land cover change using satellite imagery, and a lot of kind of freely available data layers that exist. For example, here to the left, we have this, open data science project from the EU that has made a lot of kind of land cover data available. Also to the right, we can see this biodiversity intactness and available habitat, which is data which is available through the IUCN Red List, and through a series of researchers who have collected this data and made it freely available, so that we can really see if over 10 years the different habitats have grown or shrunk, and how that could have potentially affected biodiversity, and relate that to everything else that we've learned about the biosphere reserves. Next slide. And other really interesting data that we also have available now at a global scale are these human footprint maps, and we can see if for example, the rate of human footprint change has anything to do with how the biosphere reserves have been changing in these other ways that we know about. And also something quite exciting that I think is happening this year as well for the anniversary is that there's going to be some new databases available for the MAB research community of all the Biosphere Reserve polygons, and so we can see the boundaries and we can see the different zonations, and we can kind of create these layers of knowledge of the Biosphere Reserves that we've been following over 10 years. So I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities with all of this new data and this really good repository of knowledge that we have of these 100 and so biosphere reserves. So next slide. So this is really in the works now, and we're starting to work on it quite intensely. So we're hoping that in the next couple of years we'll really get a good insight into this knowledge, and as Lisen was saying, and be able to kind of create this repository of deeper understanding on a larger scale than is possible with small case studies. So I think that's it from us, and I think maybe we have time for a question if there is one. And I think the question can either be for us or for Martin as well, I guess.
Thank you very much to both Lisen and Alethea. This is a very exciting work that's global, and it's in progress still after three rounds. I see that there are some comments for you in the chat, Alethea, about data sets that can be used from Doris, for instance, in the Rhön Biosphere Reserve. Thank you. Any questions or comments for Lisen and Alethea before we move on? I think it's all very, very clear. And if you have any questions, you can write it down in a Q&A that you see at the bottom of your screen. Okay, now we move on. We will get insights into different projects, current projects. And Helena Freitas, she's a UNESCO chair and the director of the Center of Functional Ecology, Science for People and the Planet at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. And she is leading a big new research project looking at the 12 biosphere reserves that they have in Portugal. So please, Helena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Inger. Thank you very much for this kind invitation to join you this morning. And so I will try to very briefly introduce you to the project. So I share my screen. I hope not this one. So can you see it? Yeah, I think so. You can see it, right? Okay, the name of this project is called Biosphere Reserves, Sustainable Territories, Resilient Communities. And actually, Inger and the Biosphere Reserve of Norway is involved in the project. So we are collaborating in this project. It's just, we started a few months ago, but due to the pandemic situation, we didn't manage to do part of the work, but it's running, and it's going to be a very nice project for all of us, I think. Well, as it was said, we are part of nature, so that's the first. I mean, the principle of this, how the idea to build up this project. We are very much into biodiversity, and nature. And I believe that these biosphere reserves are very important to achieve these global targets. So this is the very basics, and even if we accept, I'm trying to do it fast as I don't have, I think I have 10 minutes. So even if we accept that we are part of nature and we understand the role of nature in order to provide the services and the goods and services that we need, the fact is that we haven't done much in terms of all the international targets, especially this one of the CBD. As you can see, essentially we haven't met any of the targets that we were supposed to achieve in 2020. And some of them are really critical, like the habitat loss or pollution pressures on ecosystems. And this is our big challenge for the next global framework. So we do have to care for nature if you want to preserve the planet and the well-being. So in Portugal, we do have 12 biosphere reserves, and half of them in the islands of the Azores and Madeira in the Atlantic Ocean, and the half of them in inland, and 3 of them are transboundary biosphere reserves with Spain, our only neighbor. And they are even if the size of the country is not really big, we do have a lot of diversity of habitats, landscapes, diversity, land management. And so we have different biosphere reserves, and this is a big challenge for the project itself. I'm just trying to show you very briefly 3 or 4 of them. And this is in the south. This one is in the south, and it's just a recent reserve. It is from the 2 years ago, I think 3 years ago, established over the last, and it's a very nice reserve, but one of the pressures in here is drought. This is more like a savanna-like. It's a transition ecosystem that we have in the south of Portugal, where the conditions of rain are really not very regular. So, and we have problems with drought. And this is the place where we have a lot of these steparian birds. And so the idea of this reserve, it's The first one where we have established the agro-environmental measures for farming systems. And so we try to manage the land in a way that we can preserve these steppe birds. It's a very nice ecosystem. Another one, just another example, is our tiniest island in the Azores, where we have 500 people living there, the Corvo Biosphere Reserve. It's the smallest island of the Azores archipel with 9 islands. This is the tiniest one. And it's a very, very, very interesting island where we have a lot of good examples of managing energy, for example, together with land management and of course biodiversity. Another example is the transboundary reserve with Spain in the north of Portugal, where we still have a lot of these old farming systems, so the terraces and good examples of land management from the past. And there is another big challenge because it's extremely diverse and it's a mountain area, not the biggest one, but one of the highest mountains that we have in the north of Portugal. The most recent Biosphere Reserve is in the Madeira Island. It was established last year, the end of last year. It's the Porto Santo Island. In Madeira, we have basically three islands. We have two because the other one is really not inhabited. And so probably you have heard about the big forest of the island of Madeira, where we have it's an endemic forest, is a Laurasia forest. Is a fantastic diversity forest. Is the Madeira Island. We have like 1,000 plant species, and 90% are endemics. And this one is another island, is the second biggest island of the archipel of Madeira, and it's Porto Santo, where you have like 5,000-6,000 inhabitants, and it's totally different. So it's a drought-prone area, and that it is not very distant from the Madeira, but it's totally different. But there's a lot of endemic species too, a lot of diversity. And as I said, is the most recent Biosphere Reserve that we are going to study. Basically, it's like starting from the beginning, which is fantastic because we have marine ecologists, we have terrestrial ecologists in the team, and it's going to be very, very challenging times. And on the other hand, and together with this project, we are planning to establish, it will be by the end of June, and we are going to formally establish another thematic network, and this one is the Portuguese-speaking countries Biosphere Reserves. And so we are 23 Biosphere Reserves, 7 in Brazil, in Mozambique, in Cape Verde, in Guinea and São Tomé. And now we are trying to push the Angolan government to establish the first Biosphere Reserve in the south of Angola. We hope we will be successful, and they will actually join us in the launching of this network in Porto in 1 week from now, more or less. And the idea of this Portuguese-speaking countries is again to create more density in terms of all the kind of methods we can apply together by establishing common targets, common strategies, and by increasing the network of scientists that can collaborate in terms of promoting these biosphere reserves as excellent sites, as Martin was saying. So this is running aside from our project, but it's one of the outputs that we would like to promote. So the project itself, the idea is to establish a conceptual. Well, from our team, it's I will just briefly introduce you to two of the main topics of the project, because it is really a huge program. And one of them is the conceptual model for the assessment of ecosystem services that we plan to establish and as a transversal project in all the biosphere reserves of the Portuguese territories. well, starting, of course, by mapping, ecosystem services, participatory methodologies that we would like to apply involving the communities in all these reserves. We have started this program because we are not allowed because of pandemic situation, but now we have started last month. And we have the intention to establish a sustainable development plans for all these reserves. And this will be part of a participatory methodology. And training is also part of this specific program. As someone was saying, this is the year to reconcile humanity with nature, and we hope so. And we would like to be part of this really hopefully large wave of reconciliation of humanity with nature. Just very briefly showing some of the activities of this program, mapping biosphere ecosystem diversity, as I said, with all the conventional programs and the international scientific programs. But not only that, we also would like to include the IPBES nature for, I think you all know, nature contribution to people. It's a very different and difficult concept to apply, but we'd like to do it. Not only that, the idea is to translate the ecosystem services approach into the nature-based solutions approach so that we can establish a number of pilot programs that can be applied in our biosphere reserves and really make some difference in terms of the economical activity of the territories. Well, just go and the indicators of another program that is part of the project is what we call the Memory for All. Is a big project that we have inside, which is with colleagues from humanities, historians basically, and it's we are collecting all the information on traditional knowledge, but also just activities or the collection of photos, tools of different of the farming activities of the past, or different tools of fisheries, all kinds of stuff that people, communities would like to bring over weeks and days of meetings with communities. It's a very interesting approach, and the idea is that we have a big portal that is going to be, it's already on. If you'd like to have a look, it's called Memory for All. And with this approach, the idea is make history sharing yours. Make the history of the reserves sharing yours. And so it's a collaborative strategy, and we also want to bring the youth and the young people, the young communities. So we have a specific program for youth. That is, we are about to share it with the MAB program, and we hope to get support from them. And the idea is really to bring. So we have it's a participatory approach and methodology in order to bring all the knowledge we can and the history of the communities. And we want them to be part of the strategy for the future, and really learning together. So, and this is I'm just finishing. It's about to finish. This is next week we have an event celebrating 50 years of MAB, and this is a big event where we will have all the biosphere reserves of the Portuguese-speaking countries, as I said, with the presence of some of them from Africa and from Brazil. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Helena, for introducing this current research project in Portugal. And as you heard, it's quite extensive. And it's quite exciting as well, especially I like the part memory for all, that you have this portal where you have all the material that you collect, so it's available to all. I think that's it's a very nice output. Yes, we have one more presentation before we have a coffee break. And that's by Rosalind Bryce, and she's the director of the Centre for Mountain Studies at the University of Highlands and Islands in Scotland. And she also just recently got funded a EU project that will start up involving 4 different biosphere reserves in 4 different countries. So please, Rosalind, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to take part this morning, and thanks, Inga, for the introduction. So yes, I want to talk a bit about our new Cultivate project, which is about co-creating cultural narratives for sustainable rural development. Can I just check, can everyone see the slide and the picture there? It's not, yeah, great. Okay, so this is a collaborative project, as Inga said, between 4 universities and 4 biosphere reserves across Europe. So we're building in this project on previous partnerships where the universities have already worked with some of the biospheres involved. And there's real opportunities here to kind of build on some of the research ideas and emerging concepts that we've been developing in some of these other projects, and to bring them together across a larger scale. So I think it's a really exciting initiative. And I think having the opportunity to do this research in biosphere reserves is ideal. We've conceptualized biosphere reserves as sustainable heritage areas in some of our other work, where we look at both the cultural and the natural resources in an integrated way, and look at how they contribute to the well-being and sustainable development for the communities in these areas. So the fact that biosphere reserves are learning places for sustainable development, and they have that ethos of community engagement, is really positive for being able to carry out high quality transdisciplinary research to really understand some of the interactions between the social and ecological systems in these areas, and looking also at issues of tensions and conflicts between different values and different views of how these areas and landscapes should be managed. And the fact we have such a large network of biosphere reserves obviously gives us a lot of potential to take comparative approaches, as has been discussed in some of the other presentations, and also look at how we can exchange the knowledge and experience that we can get across a large area. So just to show you the partnership that we have in this project on the map there. So we are working in Scotland with the Wester Ross Biosphere. We're working with Inga and Alithia, who are obviously here today, with Nordhordland Biosphere in Norway. We have the Estonian University of Life Sciences and the West Estonian Archipelago Biosphere Reserve, and the Czech University of Life Sciences working with the Trebon Basin Biosphere as well. So I think we've got a really nice spread of some really diverse landscapes across Europe, kind of incorporating mountainous areas, coastal areas, islands, and that allows us to look at how the different geographies involved influence the cultural narratives that we're interested in. So the objectives of the Cultivate project are really to investigate the role of cultural narratives in socio-ecological systems, and to look at how that influences sustainable development and how we can make progress towards some of the sustainable development goals. So in this project, we really want to characterize the diversity and structure of the cultural narratives in these different landscapes, and really understand the diversity within different parts of these communities in these areas, and understand how they're linked to the different geographical specificities in these landscapes and the variable socioeconomic contexts. But also look at how these narratives are being shaped in response to big global drivers of change, including land use, climate change, changes in population demographics, and more recently, obviously, the pandemic as well. Part of the way we'll engage people in this project is to use a creative co-constructive approach with communities and stakeholders. And part of that will be to try and create quite creative means of engaging, and also creative outputs. So using methods like film-based, narrative-based photography approaches to really engage as many people as we can with the process. It was really nice to hear Helena's presentation. I think there's a lot of crossover between some of the methods that you're using in your project in terms of gathering the histories of the communities, for example. So it's great to see that crossover. And finally, we want to look at how we can make some recommendations for policy to integrate some of these narratives and these less tangible views of the cultural underpinnings of these areas in sustainable development planning in the future. So the research questions associated with the project, so we want to understand the role of those cultural heritage narratives and how they shape sustainable landscapes and communities. And part of that will be to understand how a co-creation approach can be an effective means of doing this, and being a better way of engaging rural communities in eliciting, reshaping and disseminating some of the cultural narratives that are related to landscape sustainability. And as I said, we want to understand how we can better integrate these cultural narratives into systems of landscape planning and development. So this slide shows some of the key themes that we're going to be working with in this project. The project only started in June, so we're at a very early stage at the moment. We're starting to look at how we're going to develop some of these concepts into a framework that we can implement in the different case study biospheres. So we're going to take a socio-ecological systems approach and look at how we can combine some of the cultural paradigms and cultural heritage frameworks with socio-ecological systems to better help us understand the cultural dimensions of landscape sustainability. We're going to draw on the concept of virtuous circles in this project that we've worked with in one of our previous project Shape, where we look at how the preservation and valuation of cultural and natural heritage can lead to positive impacts on sustainability and community well-being, and by doing that can also feed back positively to the way we manage these resources. We also will use the seeds of a good Anthropocene framework to consider how we can promote kind of positive innovation and build new positive initiatives that help people think differently about the ways they can engage with sustainable practices in their areas. So some of the practices we will use in the project, this will be very collaborative, and we're going to take this co-production, co-creation approach where we really engage communities and stakeholders from the very beginning of the project in the design of the research itself and how we will actually go about collecting data and analysing that data. We want to stay focused on the positive, so to look at the positive opportunities that come out of some of these narratives. So obviously we'll encounter conflict and tension, but we want to kind of try to find new kind of more innovative ways of deliberating and putting into practice positive ways of addressing some of these challenges. And obviously we want to promote the idea of learning between the sustainable landscapes we're working with as well. So just a bit more about the socio-ecological frameworks. We're going to work early in the project on looking at the cultural dimensions of these socio-ecological systems. So there's been some work done on this already. This paper, for example, draws out 5 dimensions of the cultural aspects of socio-ecological systems. And I think these are some of the themes under which we might explore some of these cultural narratives with the communities and stakeholders. So, for example, the biocultural interactions, the way communities and stakeholders have a relationship with nature and their environment, and exploring how that works. More specifically, understanding local ecological knowledge and traditional practices and how those relate to sustainable landscapes. Also looking at things like livelihood dynamics, how people's living work in these areas influence both the natural resources in the area and the kind of sustainability practices that people engage with. And I think the narrative approach will really help us understand the meanings, values and identities that people have with their landscapes. These less tangible, value-driven approaches kind of help us uncover these sometimes more hidden aspects of the way people relate to the places they live in. And there's also the issues, the cultural aspects of the governance and access, how people perceive the ways in which they can get involved in decision-making and their willingness to actually engage in decision-making processes and how they feel communities are represented at those kind of more decision-making levels. So I think these are some of the themes we might start to look at earlier in the project. Just to talk a bit more about the idea of virtuous circles as well, I think that's a useful way to start to envisage some of the relationships in our landscapes that link the kind of natural and cultural resources with different aspects of community well-being and community sustainability. So there's a premise that we're often subject to these more kind of vicious circles in cultural landscapes where we're experiencing biodiversity loss, erosion of character, loss of populations and services. And the essence of this framework is really to look at how we might reinstate some of these feedback loops so we can actually build a more positive system that feeds kind of back onto itself, and you get more living landscapes that invite more people in who might behave in a more kind of sustainable way. So I think that might be a helpful way of mapping some of the interactions in our systems in this project. Scale will also be an important aspect of this project. We would like to explore cultural narratives at different spatial scales, right from the very local, but also looking at these regional landscape level scale, but also how the narratives expressed at those levels kind of are negotiated and contest with some of the national level narratives that exist. The ways, for example, the tourism industry might promote some of these areas is quite different from how different aspects of the community may perceive them. So I think it would be important to look at how some of these narratives play out and how some of these narratives become very dominant at the expense of others, more marginal narratives. As I said, co-creation is going to be a really important part of this project. This obviously has at its heart the idea of participation, but it's quite a different way of doing participation, where we involve communities right from the beginning, and they have a role in co-designing the research. So we'll invite representatives from the biospheres, stakeholders, and as many people from different parts of the community to engage with the design of the research as we can, so that they do act as more proactive partners in the research process, thereby kind of creating outputs that are more valuable locally and that they have more of a buy-in among the communities we're working with. So we believe in terms of the heritage angle, that will help us build up a more democratized heritage that truly reflects the people that live in the place and that are involved in working in the area. So that will be a challenge for us in the early parts of the project to look at how we can do that effectively across some quite large landscapes. And I think these co-creation processes will kind of help us develop these kind of new positive narratives. And we'd like to look at that using some of these ideas from the seeds of a good Anthropocene, where we look at the different positive initiatives that emerge from some of these areas and also from other areas as well, and bring those in as kind of themes for inspiration to discuss and to deliberate and look at more towards the future as to how we can better move to a more sustainable future. I've just got a diagram there showing the different phases of the research, kind of the sequence of the work, where we'll start with the more conceptual work, looking at these socio-ecological systems and how we combine it with cultural heritage ideas. And then we move to that transdisciplinary case study research, where we'll explore the cultural heritage narratives that exist in our communities and among our stakeholders. We'll try to develop a forum where we can look at how we co-create these narratives and start to look at how these might be reshaped through these deliberation processes and engagement towards a more sustainable cultural heritage for the future. So perhaps reshaping the narrative in the way that Mariam mentioned right at the beginning in her vision. And finally, as I said, thank you, yep, nearly finished. And yeah, the last stage will be to look at how we can synthesize the results into policy and practice. And finally, I just wanted to bring out some of the Sustainable Development Goals targets that I think this research has the potential to inform. So obviously, it's very much based around the protection of our cultural and natural heritage and the sustainable management of natural resources. But we also have potential here to inform the empowerment and promotion and inclusion of communities and stakeholders across a whole range of different characteristics. And that's something I think the co-creation approach will hopefully allow us to do. So allowing us to have a truly participatory approach. And also, I think the use of the narratives and the fact that we're going to use more creative methods will help with the awareness raising about some of our big climate change and other global challenge issues, including, of course, sustainable tourism, which are a big driver in the areas that we're working with. And yeah, I think that's me, just to thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ross. Brilliant. Very exciting, this co-creation process that we are about to start with. I am very curious to see where this leads, and I'm very optimistic using this as a method. So are there any questions for Ross and this project focusing on cultural heritage? I see no questions.
I think Miriam has her hand up, actually.
Yes, Miriam.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that was really interesting. I'm just wondering how what you have said at the end, how we can make it, link it with the narrative that we are doing globally, and also not to confuse with the cultural heritage and the world heritage and all these different designation. Even within UNESCO, we have some issues to explain the differences sometimes between the different designation. So I think that some of the words that were used, maybe we could see with you and the others how to make sure that it's adding clarity and not confusion. That's just a little concern that I have when I went through the PowerPoint very quickly, that some other people may have. Thank you, but it's great initiative, and I think that there are lots of potential to work on this positive, inspiring narrative, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Yes, terminology is important, words are important, and language is important when we communicate. Yes, now I see that we actually have a coffee break. I'm sure people want to stretch their legs and grab some tea or coffee. So please do that. And when you come back, Alicia will chair the next session of examples from exciting research in biosphere reserves. So please take a break, and thank you very much for all the brilliant talks this far. I mean, now we really know what the MAB program is about, and we've also seen some exciting examples of the research that actually goes on within it. So thank you very much to all presenters this far.
Okay. Hi everyone, so we're just waiting for us all to be back from our short break, and we will start at 10:40 again. And in this coming section, we will first be sharing 4 case studies and talks from guests and partners. And then we will go on to a panel discussion. So I can see it's now 10:40, and first we will have Dr. Ping from China sharing her research with us. And I'm very happy that she is here, and she is one of the MAB young spokespeople of the anniversary. So this is very nice you could join. So Dr. Ping, you can share your screen and take the floor whenever you are ready. And I think you will have to unmute, I think, because we can't hear you. Great.
Yeah. Okay. Can you see my screen right now?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia, for the invitation. And good morning, good afternoon, and I'm very happy to have this opportunity to join in this webinar. So my talk may be a little different from the other researchers. It's kind of a brief introduction of the Biosphere Reserve and also the biodiversity conservation in China. So it's kind of relaxed time. Maybe you can just relax. And my talk will focus on 3 aspects. The first one, I will briefly introduce both the Chinese National Committee of the MAB program in China and also the Biosphere Reserves. And then I will go to the biodiversity conservation in China. I will choose like 2 examples to introduce, and then I will briefly introduce my own work during the past years. So for the Chinese National Committee for the MAB program, it was established in 1978. So it's kind of, it is composed of different departments and also the ministries. So both the chair and the secretariat are located in the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And it has also 4 vice chairs from different ministries and the administrations, like the ecology and the environment, and the forestry and the grassland administration, and the Ministry of the Agriculture and the Rural Affairs, and also the China National Committee for UNESCO. And besides the 4 vice chairs, it has also 11 different members from the also the different departments and 3 provincial governments. And besides the National Committee, from the April this year, the MAB China has also established the advisory council with 42 members. These members are all scientists and experts that have very long history of experiences in the Biosphere Reserve. So they can give the scientific advices to the development of the committee. And this slide shows the Biosphere Reserve in China right now. So from this figure, you can see those reserves with the red remarks are the World Biosphere Reserves. So besides the World Biosphere Reserves, there's also a Chinese Biosphere Reserve network. It was established in 1993. So right now it has 185 reserves. So all these reserves are very good candidate reserves for the World Biosphere Reserve. And because of this network, so all the reserves in this network have very good relationship with each other. So they can communicate very well with each other. This network has 185 reserves. So these reserves composed of about 1/3 of all the national nature reserves in China, and China has established some pilot national parks right now, with 10 national parks. So among the 10 national parks, about half of the pilot national parks are also included in this reserve network. And besides the national committee and also the network, we also have one magazine that focus on the man and the biosphere. So this magazine was first issued in 1994 as inner newsletter inside the network. But since 1999, this magazine became published for all. And this magazine will focus on one nature reserve in each issue with very detailed information to introduce both the MAB program and also focus on the nature reserves. Until May 2020, there have been 122 issues that including 6 English issues, and with more than 600,000 copies right now. So besides the introduction of the different nature reserves, this magazine will focus on some special issues on some uncertain occasions. In last year, in 2020, it has published one special issue that focus on the CBD COP15. My second part will focus on something about the biodiversity conservation in China. I will introduce from 2 aspects. First is the protected area system, and the second one is the national red list assessment. The protected area system was the first nature reserve was established in 1956. So it has a very long history, just not very long after the establishment of the People's Republic of China. And then after like 30 years, both the number and the area of the nature reserves just grew slowly in China. And from the 2001, there have been one big project that named the National Wildlife Protection and Nature Reserve Project. After that project, both the number and the area of the nature reserve rapidly increased. You can see from this figure that from around 2001, that the line greatly increased. And this figure shows the National Nature Reserve just established before 1993, and from 1994 to 2007, and then after the 2007. And from around 2010, that the Chinese government began to realize the problem of only establish a different nature reserve, and began to propose to establish the national parks. And till the 2019, there have been 10 national parks right now, and there will be more and more national parks later.
You have about a minute, Shansha.
Okay, thank you. So I will just here I briefly introduce what is happening right now for the Asian elephant. I believe maybe you just have learned something about this elephant from news or maybe some reports right now. These elephants are a group of elephants with 15 elephants. And these elephants used to distribute in one biosphere reserve, the Sichuan National Nature Reserve. And from early this year, they began to wandering north, like hundreds of kilometers away to the north. And so the Chinese government has used a very high technology to monitor these elephants to make sure that both the people and the elephants are safe. Another example is the National Red List assessment. The Chinese government began to realize the importance of the endangered species and began to use the IUCN Red List criteria to do the national assessment. From 1990s to now, there have been 4 national assessments. I just take an example of the vertebrates. From the 1998 to 2020, the number of the species that included in this assessment gradually increased, and also just included all the vertebrates, all the known vertebrates right now in China right now. So this will give us very good advices for the management decisions. Besides that, we have also have an annual checklist of all the species in China that updated from 2008 to now. So this will give us very good baseline data for us. So my own work, I have from 2005 to 2016, I have done lots of researches in the nature reserves. My first survey in nature reserves can be as early as 2005 in the Xishuangbanna National Nature Reserve. And after that, I have been to like dozens of nature reserves in the following 10 years, from the very north China to the very South China. And I have done research in animal behavior and conservation biology. And I'm very lucky that I have seen the development of the technology of the research from the very first use our own eyes and the telescope to do the observation. And then we use the infrared camera, and then the unmanned aerial vehicles. And right now we are going to use some low altitude satellite to help us to do the researches. I believe that with these technologies, both the accuracy and the depth of the research will be gradually increased. From 2017 to now, I began to work in the Scientific Authority of CITES in China. CITES is an intergovernmental convention that focuses on the international trade in
Dr. Ping, are you still there? It looks like you're having some connection problems.
Okay.
Dr. Ping, it looks like we're having some connection problems, and I think we are over time. So if you can find a way to end the talk, and thank you. It seems like she is now offline. So, but we were nearing the end of her talk, and as she was saying, she is a researcher on the Office of the Scientific Authority of CITES. So it's been very interesting to get her kind of perspective on the implementation of CITES in biosphere reserves and the focus of the network in China. So thank you, Dr. Ping, and hopefully she'll be able to be back online later. And now we go on to Isaac Yor Barnes from Ghana, and he was the winner of the MAB Young Scientist Award in 2019. So if you are here, Isaac, please take the floor and share your screen, and you have 10 minutes. Thank you. You are muted, Isaac.
There you
go.
Hello.
Now we can hear you. Can you share your screen, Isaac?
Yeah.
Great. And Isaac, I will let you know when you have a few minutes so that you can finish your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Isaac Yaubans. In 2019, I was one of the award laureates for UNESCO MAB Young Scientist Award. And basically, my project was focused on using storytelling through a geostory map to highlight the Biosphere Reserve anthropogenic effects on community livelihood and adaptation. My study area. So basically, we all know that there is a vicious cycle between human-nature interaction. And anytime this interaction is done unsustainably, what happens is that it leads to the deterioration of the people whose livelihood predominantly depends on these resources, and in the long run, on the resources itself. However, the Biosphere Reserve concept seeks to reconcile the conservation of biodiversity with sustainable use of these resources. And so what my study sought to do was to use the Biosphere Reserve in Ghana as my case study. In Ghana, Biosphere Reserve is so far the oldest reserve in the country, which was established in 1983. Just like any other biosphere reserve, the Biosphere Reserve has three core demarcations known as the core, the buffer, and then the transitional zone, and their respective acreage is listed there. Currently, we have over 42 communities surrounding this Biosphere Reserve, with most of the predominant activity happening there is agriculture. Some of the communities live either permanently or seasonally around this buffer zone. The objective of the study was to capture local community stories of changing trends along the Biosphere Reserve and its impact on livelihood in order to construct a geographical interactive story map that highlights community narratives. All that we sought to do was most of the literature on the Biosphere Reserve and other human-nature interaction has to do from a scientific perspective. I sought to bring the community, the narrative of the community, and look at what the community themselves are feeling in that regard. And so our scope sought to first assess the Biosphere Reserve, develop some educational materials around it, and then contribute to the existing knowledge of the Biosphere Reserve. Our methodology, we used, in addition to using both the deck study and literature review, I think what made our research extremely valuable was that we combined drone imagery with satellite data to be able to provide land use, land cover change analysis. These are some of the study areas we visited along the Biosphere Reserve. Some few communities predominantly noted around the Biosphere Reserve. We did a little analysis on the river that flows close to the Biosphere Reserve, but for the sake of time, I've excluded the river. So I'm only going to speak on the forest cover for now. In our community engagement processes, to ensure inclusiveness, what we did was that we ensured that we had women, we had men, we had the youth, we had opinion leaders, we have traditional leaders, and we had even some of the institutional stakeholders to solicit their opinions on the human-nature interaction. This is one of our findings. Our key finding was that from 1986 to date, using satellite and drone imagery, we saw that in terms of canopy cover in the core, which is the very restricted area, the canopy cover has built up over time. from the picture on my extreme left from 1980, you realize that the forest, the core, was not so closely packed. But up to 2016, you realize that the core has become, in terms of the canopy cover, we have huge canopy cover there. In terms of the transitional area, there are a lot of changes that happened there from 1986 to date. However, I would want to just touch on a few. The first I would want to touch on will be set on settlement. And so from the circles I've projected, that is settlement. From 1986 to date, settlement has gradually increased proportionally. The increase also implies that there has been increase in population size too. But inversely, what is most interesting is this, is that although population has increased, settlement has increased, when you look at my legend, you realize that farmland has rather decreased. Roads and bare lands has also decreased. What has rather sprung out is an increase in woodlands, which means that although settlement population has increased, there has been more increase in woodlands. What accounted for this change? I will go on and then explain what we realized. So as I said, along the Biosphere Reserve, there is this river that also flows just around it. We call it the Bia River. However, there is illegal mining happening upstream of the river. And so that is what is happening. That is what has led to the change in the river. When we captured the local stories, the community did tell us that from 1950s to 1980s, elephants moved from their core, drank from this river. However, now the current state is that the water is so polluted, and because of the increase in human population, the elephants do not come to the river any longer. And so this shows the deterioration in the water quality, which is close to. Now, what happened, or what was the success story in ensuring that there is a decline in agricultural land, but there's an increase in woodland, is basically, from our research, we realized that we can attribute it to the implementation of the community resources management area, which is the CREMA. CREMA, what is CREMA? CREMA is an initiative that ensures that the communities that live along or around the Biosphere Reserve is supported both technically and in terms of livelihood, alternative livelihood. People are given snails, bees, beekeeping, snail rearing, and some are given other supporting systems in terms of alternative livelihood. So you realize that the communities do not solely depend on agriculture. The predominant activity there is cocoa farming. Instead of only relying on cocoa farming as their predominant source of livelihood, they have alternative source of livelihood. Therefore, moving them a little bit away from using so heavily or depending so heavily on the agricultural land, which eventually would affect the Biosphere Reserve. Over the years, these are some of the few projects that has been implemented in the Biosphere Reserve. We have the Protected Area Development Program, the Biosphere Resources for Diversity Conservation, the Sustainable Development in Sub-Saharan Africa, and the very recent project that happened was the Green Economy in Biosphere Reserve, where communities were given capacity building and other alternative livelihood to support them. And so, although CREMA in general has been a success, the truth is that because human nature interacts within the biosphere, there have been just some few antagonistic relationships. Especially the community said that before the intervention, before the coming of the intervention, the communities used to even go into the core. And we know within the Biosphere Reserve, the core is a restricted area. But the communities used to go into the core to hunt for wild animals. But ever since the intervention started coming, all these activities have stopped. And this is just a footage of some of the snail rearing, a man who has benefited from the snail rearing project, and a woman sharing an account of her interaction with the CREMA team. We went
You have about a minute, Isaac, just letting you know.
We went further to carry out a need assessment on what alternative, if the project should continue, what should be done. This slide just shows a bit of what interventions the community still look forward to receiving. In conclusion, there are two key conclusions I would want to draw out. That although anthropogenic activities have increased, this has not significantly had a negative impact on the natural resources. In addition to that, the ease on the natural resources is as a result of the increase in the livelihood support or the CREMA intervention. This is my recommendation. What I would want to recommend is that moving forward, we have to use, or we have to adapt the application of machine learning and intensity analysis to understand change, to measure change, and also to understand change from the interval category and then the transition. I would also want to propose that we have to ensure or encourage the education and advocacy. This time around, I would want to encourage that the education should target even the senior high school students and the university so that we can build human capacity, whilst we also target the livelihood of the people who live along the Biosphere Reserve. The key success of my research is attributed to the livelihood adaptation intervention that the community receives that has led to the significant change. And so I would encourage that if there are more support to ensure that people, the communities living along the Biosphere Reserve has enough support to ensure that they don't depend solely on their natural resources. I would also want to touch on the ecotourism. Ecotourism, we talk about medical tourism, where people would want to leave their surrounding and then come into the forest area just to have a serene environment. It is something we could think about to provide additional support or livelihood support for the communities that live along the Biosphere Reserve. Lastly, we cannot talk about the conservation of the reserve without talking about the institutional strengthening. And then most of the institutions that live along, they don't have GPS, satellite tracking devices to monitor the health and ecosystem of the Biosphere Reserve. And if any support can be given in that regards, it will go a long way to support the Biosphere Reserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isaac, for your really interesting presentation. Isaac did this as part of the Ghana County Water Partnership, the Global Water Partnership. It's really great to see this thread of narratives, cultural narratives, and community participation throughout all the presentations today. And Isaac, if you can stop sharing your screen, we will have our next speaker, who will be Jared Cousins.
Okay.
Okay, now Alethea has frozen in time, so
You're here.
Yeah, are you back? Yeah.
Yes, great.
Great, so it's been fine now and it's unstable, so let's see how this goes suddenly. Okay. Okay, I'll ask that classic question. Can everyone see my screen and can everyone hear me clearly? Great. Okay, that's not so. Yeah. In our biosphere here in Bergen, or just north of Bergen in Norway. I'm in fact not in Bergen now. I'm coming from Nevada in Spain, and sadly it's not sunny. So yeah, so I guess a couple of important things to pull out from this title here is the mapping, the participatory component, and ecosystem services. And I'll cover a few of those, and I'll talk about some of the things that we've done in the study. So just briefly, I'm sure many of you are aware of the ecosystem services concept, and it's just the countless ways that nature contributes to our well-being. So it could be extractive things like agricultural processes, or extracting timber for building houses or firewood. And then also more cultural activities, like in this picture, skiing, which is obviously quite common in Norway, and pollination services, and then also some of the less tangible things like our mental well-being. And a really important thing to make note of is that ecosystem services make important contributions to sustainability targets like the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is just a paper which included surveys of researchers who work on sustainable development, and it just shows how ecosystem services link so strongly to the Sustainable Development Goals and many of the targets. So managing ecosystem services contributes significantly to achieving sustainable targets. And then sort of, I think everyone's quite aware of these things. It's the amount that we depend on nature is quite clearly reflected in the mark that we've left on the planet. So more than 70% of Earth's land surface has been modified by humans. I think an important thing to take note of as well is that just because we've left a mark, it's not necessarily a negative thing. Of course, we have these social ecological systems where humans have coexisted with nature for many thousands of years, and often in a relatively harmonious way. And many of these social ecological systems, in fact, support higher biodiversity and higher biodiversity in other areas. Coming back to the ecosystem services thing, to the ecosystem services concept, if we want to manage ecosystem services, we need to know where they are in the landscape. We need to know where they're produced, and we also need to know where they're received. Also, it's important to know what the value of those different ecosystem services is. So some places, of course, have higher services, higher values of particular services than others. So a forest, for example, produces more timber than a grassland, obviously. But importantly, we need to go beyond traditional economics, and we need to look at more pluralistic methods that take social cultural values into consideration. And we also need a way to address those the spatial component of those social cultural values. So the way that we have done this in our project is use a public participation GIS. And public participation GIS is a survey tool where you ask participants to place points on a map that represent areas that they receive or they appreciate particular ecosystem services. It's a super cool tool, and intuitively it makes a lot of sense for landscape planning or land use planning. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of evidence, at least in the literature, of a lot of success with this method. So we need an entry point. And clearly, I think that biosphere reserves are a great entry point because of those existing relationships between, in our case, academia and the biosphere reserve management, and also people on the ground. So in our survey, we used this PPGIS to understand 12 the stakeholders' values of 12 ecosystem services. And this is our biosphere reserve, so it's just north of Bergen. So you can see Bergen over here, if you can see my pointer. An important thing just to take note here is this map on the top is a population density. So in our biosphere reserve, which is the red boundary, population densities are higher down here along the coast. And as we move in towards the east, we've got higher mountains and lower population densities. Couple of important things. Water is important. I don't know if those of you know, but Western Norway is wet, very, very wet. The average rainfall across our biosphere reserve is approximately 2.5 meters, and it's higher up in the mountains and a little bit lower down on the coast. Agriculture is dominated by livestock, mainly dairy, cows and sheep. And then also an interesting component here is petroleum. So the largest oil refinery is actually found sort of around here in the middle of our biosphere reserve. So what we did is we developed this ecosystem service typology, which is sort of the collection of different ecosystem services that we used. We used focus groups with key stakeholders to develop it. So we developed our own, and then we tested it with key stakeholders. And then to advertise our survey, we used newspaper articles, social media, and also the snowballing approach. And then we also organized workshops, which you can see on the right of the screen there. We went out to local libraries and we had meetings with people to take part in the survey and to learn a little bit more about our project. So a couple of results from our study. Unsurprisingly, people love outdoor recreation. I think in Norway, I'm from New Zealand, and the first phrase that I learned in Norwegian was gå på tur, which means go for a hike. So it's not really surprising that Norwegians love outdoor recreation. But of course, biodiversity is a super cool one that people had high values for. And another important thing to take note is that people value nature close to their home. So these are place-based values. So this, like I said before, is where the higher population densities are. And that's where people value nature. So people don't tend to travel too far to place values on the nature close to their home. And in this region, the population is relatively small. It's 54,000. So there's low population densities, and nature is a major part of people's lives. Another very important or interesting thing to take note is I mentioned that there's a lot of water, and hydroelectricity is very important in the region. In fact, Westland is the highest producer of hydroelectricity in the whole country. And yet people had very low values for energy production, which is also an interesting thing to take note of. And then also all these bars in blue are cultural ecosystem services. So these non-extractive services, apart from hunting and fishing and wild berries, but people have high value, are able to cognitively link cultural values more so than with others, apart from this agricultural ecosystem services, because agriculture has a very long history in the region. And I'll go into that in a bit soon. I have 1 minute left, apparently. So this is just something I looked at, is like which ecosystem services commonly co-occur. And we did this sort of so-called bundling approach. And you can see here we have these cultural landscapes where cultural heritage, which is this blue bar, and agricultural products occurred commonly together. So people link, so spatially, agricultural products and cultural heritage are inseparable. And then outdoor recreation occurs often with biodiversity appreciation. So people like to go hiking, and while they're hiking, they enjoy their biodiversity. Multifunctional landscapes, and this is Knarvik, the largest settlement in the region, and it shows that people have high values for lots of different things close to home, and this is quite clear in an analysis that I did that showed people don't travel very far. And then these passive cultural values, which is wild food collection and sort of these mental well-beings, co-occurred. And then hunting and fishing, which was predominantly fishing, because as you saw on the map, it's a very coastal communities, and also the fjord system makes up a large component of people's lifestyles. I have some more slides, but I don't think I have a lot more time, so I won't go into them. I'll show one more slide then. So I also had a look at how people value different things in the different biosphere zones, because I wanted to test this method as a way of evaluating people's values for different ecosystem services in the different zones. So that's not so interesting, but in the buffer zones, we can see that this represents a relatively modern interpretation of a biosphere reserve, where agricultural values and outdoor recreation and cultural heritage scored quite highly in these buffer zones. And so it's sort of a more modern interpretation of ecosystem of biosphere reserves. And then in the core zones, there's very few extractive services, and apart from hunting and fishing, which we have a salmon fjord, and we also have another small fjord over here where people undertake hunting and fishing. So just moving forward from this, I guess this is something that Isaac touched on, and these are really important points, is that this information needs to end up in the right hands. I'm somewhat academic, and it's kind of pointless for me to do all this research and it just to sit in a paper somewhere. So our next steps are to undertake workshops and meetings with biosphere management, municipality workers and agricultural advisory members to share this knowledge, and also to gain more insights from them on what sort of the things that are important to them. We hope to continue to foster these existing relationships and build new ones, and of course have this multi-directional flow of actionable knowledge. And of course, for me, I would really love to bring this sort of methodology of participatory mapping to other biosphere reserves where it's possible. Thanks very much for listening. Yeah. It doesn't. I'm trying. I'm going to leave because I can't. Don't know why. Hold on a sec.
And so while Jared stops sharing his screen, we will have our next speaker, which is Kera, I hope I said that right, Kutse Hanak from South Africa, from Rhodes University. And she will be taking the stage next before we move on to the panel, and hopefully we'll have a minute or two for questions. And remember to use the chat as well for questions if you want. So Kera, if you're here, please share your screen and take this.
I'm Alicia, hi. Let me just Can you see my full screen, or are you seeing?
So it doesn't appear like we can't hear you. It looks like you're unmuted, but maybe it's something about your mic.
No, I can hear you.
Me too.
We couldn't have a whole webinar without any tech issues. No. So.
and now can you hear me?
It seems like it's your mic, so maybe it's your headset. I don't know. Maybe if you just unplug your headset, sometimes that can help. I don't know.
Yeah, I've actually unplugged my headset.
Still not.
So you should be able to hear me okay?
I can hear you. Okay.
We can hear you, yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I now can't hear anyone.
That's very odd.
Okay, now I can hear you. Now I can hear you. Sorry.
Yeah, Alicia, I'm not hearing you at all.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I'm not certain why.
Can you hear me?
Try to plug in again.
No, but I can hear Jared. Can
I heard someone.
Okay, can you hear me, Kara?
Yes, I can hear. Fine.
Okay, great. Okay, we've got it, I think.
Yes, let's go ahead.
Great.
So thank you. Can I start, Alicia?
Yes, you can start. Please take the stage.
Okay. So thank you, colleagues, for the invitation to be here, and it's been wonderful listening to everyone. Just a correction, I used to be from Rhodes University. I am now from the University of the Witwatersrand. And we spoke around, there you go, it's moving. Prof. Miriam introduced and spoke around this biodiversity crisis and this ecosystem services crisis that globally we are seeing, and the need to rethink our relationship with nature through this process. And what does this crisis mean? And does it mean that even with the investment to protected areas, we're still seeing this crisis and this failed relationship with nature that we're having as humanities, that we need to perhaps rethink our sustainability institutions and our biodiversity institutions? Is it that we are looking at the wrong scale for our institutions, for the right response to this crisis? Is it that we're speaking to the wrong actors? Is it an issue of insufficient authority or agency or autonomy? Is it just simply that it's the reality of the land use matrix that protected areas are so much smaller than the matrix? Is it because a lot of our conservation thinking is still situated in this paradigm of biodiversity versus development? Is it an issue of poor relationships and coordination? And are there opportunities to use existing institutions to remedy this? And I mean, I think all of us sitting here in this webinar think so, and think Biosphere Reserves could be these opportunities. So from the South African perspective, South Africa has 10 Biosphere Reserves, and we entered into a country agreement with UNESCO in 1995. And our first one was all the way down in the Cape, Kugelberg Biosphere Reserve, that was established in 1998. And our most recent one is Mariko Biosphere Reserve in the north, which was established in 2019. And the blue star is where I'm talking to you today from, which is Joburg. So in South Africa, Biosphere Reserves the responsible institution is our National Department of Forestry, Fishery and Environment, but also there's support from provincial governments. But although we have this support, all our Biosphere Reserves are non-profit corporations that are mostly volunteer run. We are responsible, these Biosphere Reserves, responsible for supporting their own funding, but they do get some funding from national and provincial government. They're implemented in the soft law spirit, which, although it means that Biosphere Reserves don't really have any legal teeth in terms of the conservation agenda in South Africa, what it does mean is it situates Biosphere Reserves outside socio-political debates. And for South Africa, where we have this long history of social political legacies, the apartheid era, this is really important because it situates Biosphere Reserves outside of these land management tensions. And as a result, in South Africa, the focus, as with elsewhere, is on trust, cooperation, and improved participation at the land scale to enact or to effect change around sustainability issues. So in this space, Biosphere Reserves are operating in this coordinating and facilitation role, and really speaking around facilitating these functional partnerships with a very diverse transdisciplinary actor network. And this is where some of the emerging research that I am doing is focused. So I'm going to show you two examples of South African biosphere reserves, focusing on the Kruger Canyons biosphere region, where I've done a lot of my work, and also the Goerits cluster biosphere. Both of these are very large biospheres, two of the largest in South Africa. The Kruger Canyons biosphere region has a program called the Environmental Monitor Program. And this is a community-based project that leverages partnerships with actors in its landscape to increase the conservation capacity in the landscape of both South African national parks, but also the private and provincial reserves. And what it does is it aims to create this network of really empowered environmental monitors within local communities. And before EMs joined the program, and this is some work that colleagues at K2C have done, Louise Swemmer and colleagues, they said these were their perceptions of biodiversity, that biodiversity was not important. It didn't mean anything to me. I didn't know the importance. I didn't know that there were crises. After joining the EM program, EMs reported in the same research, I now talk about the environment in general, how it works and what it provides. Often I speak about my experience and what I've learned daily. And 98% of all EMs in the program are talking to friends and family about their work, which is about their conservation work and about and around sustainability issues. So in using the words of Prof. Miriam, these EMs are acting as these youth change agents or change agents more generally. They're acting at the level of at the individual level and taking this change and this awareness around the environment and the benefits that the environment is giving humans into their community to drive behavioral change. So that's K2C. This is the Goerits cluster of Biosphere Reserve. And this is highlighting one of their programs, which is the Jobs for Carbon. And the Jobs for Carbon program really is around improving ecosystem health and resilience in a part of the landscape of South Africa called the Klein Karoo or the Little Karoo. And it's severely degraded. And this program plants speckworm, which is an indigenous plant, indigenous to the area and to the thicket of the area, creating jobs and restoring the landscape, but also unlocking the carbon economy. But in addition to this, Goerits Cluster Biosphere Reserve has entered into partnerships with the biosphere landowners and researchers to test rehabilitation techniques and methods across the landscape that are appropriate for restoration processes at large scale in this landscape. And this is just the picture on the right is a picture of one of those techniques. It's called sausages and blankets that has had lots of success. So now coming back to that question I asked around, do we need to reimagine or transform our sustainability institutions, and how do biosphere reserves then fit as this opportunity to do so? Firstly, at the scale, we are working at a biosphere reserve, we're working at the landscape scale, inclusive of both the matrix and the protected areas. And it's the activities, the conservation and the sustainability activities in the matrix that are receiving considerable attention through stewardship, and through this focus on public, private, and community collaborations in South Africa. Is it the actors and that we're not, my question previously was, are we in our previous conservation and sustainability organizations not speaking to the right actors? Biosphere reserves, in creating transdisciplinary actor networks, there's this emphasis on real partnerships, and biosphere reserves are operating in these roles as coordinators, facilitators, and connectors. And this is what our work is looking at in South Africa. And it was inspired by a lot of Prof. Liesen's work. And we're looking at the South African, how biosphere reserves are operating as these coordinator platforms. In South Africa, all of our South African 10 biosphere reserves, but we're also expanding this to specific case studies globally. And we've also just launched, with the Secretariat's help, and we've got a survey in progress at the moment around biosphere reserves that perhaps might want to be interested in joining this work in support of a publication that will be released in November for the 50th celebrations, MAB's 50th celebrations in November. Is it an issue of agency and autonomy? And this is something we don't know in South Africa, because biosphere reserves are these non-profit corporations. We don't yet know the implications of this, because there's already some challenges with horizontal and vertical integration around governance processes. And this issue of authority, the soft law, and this focus on trust and relationship building is really instrumental. I mean, and the paradigm, we all know that biosphere reserves explicitly address this paradigm, that it's not conservation versus sustainable development, but rather finding the linkages between the two. And what Prof. Martin said is the real role as biosphere reserves as learning sites for place-based learning and sharing of that knowledge in the specific context of these multifunctional landscapes. And then to close, so if we are going to respond to the challenges of the sustainability challenges of the Anthropocene, the realities are that we can't think about conservation that then precludes social and economic development. So we need to really enhance the land use multifunctionality. But land use multifunctionality, that means there are often multiple goals and functions and realities, and finding the pathways towards collaboration in these what are often contested contexts then becomes key. And my argument throughout, and I think we all endorse this because we're sitting in this webinar, is biosphere reserves, because they are these landscape scale sustainability organizations, are really acting as these collaboration coordinator, connector, and change agents. And there are this enormous opportunity and currently, in my opinion, enormously undervalued institutions that we can leverage at a global scale to better address the challenges of the Anthropocene. Before I close, sorry, I went over. I see that Alicia.
Okay. You can just finish, that's fine.
Sorry, I didn't, my timer didn't go off. My apology. I just wanted to say thank you and just show some pictures of two other researchers that are involved in the World Network and Secretariat research. And what's really interested there is what we're really interested there is how biosphere reserves then frame and shape the discourse of sustainability in the landscapes they are found. So I would like to say thank you. I'd like to apologize for going over. My alarm didn't go off and I was just happily talking.
That's
so
okay. You're just about a minute over, so that's okay.
Apologize for that rudeness.
That's fine. Thank you so much. And I think this is a really actually great kind of ending talk. This kind of nice overview of biosphere reserves, these platforms for collaboration and for sustainability. And so I think now this can lead into our panel discussion that will be led by Inger. So Inger, you can just take us to the panel.
Thank you to all the speakers. Great. And the last talk was a really nice transition to the panel conversation that will keep us busy till lunchtime. So we have about a half an hour. So I'll get straight to it. We want to discuss how can science and the MAB program contribute to the deep transformation needed for a sustainable future. And we have a diverse expertise in our panel. Not all are working in biosphere reserves, but all are working in transdisciplinary environments with different aspects of sustainability issues on land, at sea, in the north, and in the south. And I think we managed to pin all the panelists. We need to get Siri up there. There is Siri, that's great. And we need to get Miriam also up there. Yes, so I'll introduce the panelists. Siri Gronholm Carson, you can wave your hand. Yes. She's the director of NTNU Oceans, the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim. Then we have Shonil Bhagwat. He is a professor of environment and development at the Open University in London in Great Britain. And then we have Jens Christian Fosse. He's Dean at the Faculty of Engineering and Science of Western Norway University of Applied Sciences, also here in Bergen. And then we have Lisen Schultz. Yes, you already heard her, Deputy Director of Transdisciplinarity at Stockholm Resilience Center. And then we have Miriam Bomeron. You've already seen today, Chief of Section of MAB Research and Policy, Ecology and Biodiversity at UNESCO Paris. And then you have Martin Price, that you've also heard earlier, Professor Emeritus from MAB UK and Founding Director of Centre for Mountain Studies, University of Highlands and Islands in Scotland. So, I think we will go straight into it. I hope if you have questions, please post them in the chat or in the Q&A, and hopefully we'll get around to answer some of the questions from all the participants. But first I want to ask Siri and Jens Christian, because I want to start a little broad. In your experience, what do you think are the biggest challenges of integrating research with action to address societally relevant problems?
Maybe I'll start first, since you said Siri first. Okay. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's been such a pleasure to follow these very inspirational presentations and these projects. It's been a great morning. So to your question, I think first of all, that it is necessary to do so, it seems to be recognized very broadly now. I mean, if you look at the European Commission and their whole missions approach, this seems to be the melody of the day. But of course, when it comes down to everyday business, the difficult thing is to break with the things, with the way things have traditionally been done in research. Even if we see, I mean, even if we experience that this approach has failed to address complex problems sufficiently, such as biodiversity loss and so on. I think in research we have over decades and decades established ways to measure, for example, quality and merit, which we might need to rethink to succeed with kind of cross-disciplinary and cross-sectoral efforts to solve societal challenges. So the question, what is good research? We might suggest that in the situation that we are in today, it is not good research unless it is aimed at solving complex sustainability challenges. Although I'm not saying that that needs to be only kind of applied. I mean, we need basic research as well, but it needs to have that societal aspect. So in my experience because in NTNU Oceans, I work with facilitating and supporting and pushing kind of cross-disciplinary activity to solve sustainability challenges in the blue sector. I think the challenge for researchers is often to dare, from our researcher perspective, to dare to get out of our comfort zone. And I think the crew that you have collected here today, those are the kind of people who do so, who are comfortable with it, but not all researchers are. So I mean, to go out of your own area, you make yourself vulnerable in a sense.
Yeah,
so,
that's a great point.
Yeah, it's important to create kind of initiatives and arenas where researchers can meet and so on. So for example, right now at NTNU, we have put out 40 PhD scholarships to about 10 cross-disciplinary projects on where they have to address systemic approaches to sustainability. And they have to have sort of put together teams of professors from different parts of the university, life sciences, technology, humanities, and social sciences. So this is one way of kind of pushing professors to connect, or at least making it attractive to connect the academic silos and to address societal problems.
Thank you, Siri. What do you think, Jens Christian?
Yes, I would also like to thank you very much for all the presentations, and it's been very inspiring to hear all the presentations this morning. I think it's first and of course most important to recognize what Siri has said, that something is going on. I think looking at the Norwegian context for the last 15 years, I think I'm in fact quite optimistic about the progress we have had in closing this gap between research and action. And instead of thinking too much on challenges, I would like to argue that to advance sustainability and at the same time to advance responsible research and innovation, I observe a large number of initiatives to integrate research with action. Living labs are more often part of territorial development projects, and co-labs focusing on co-creation of knowledge seems to, in some places, to be part of explicit strategies for higher education institutions as well, to interact and engage with the surroundings. So in fact, I'm quite optimistic about the way we as researchers really try to close these gaps and engage more directly with the development processes and take and be part of action. Because I think the main challenge may be that researchers first and most importantly, I think, needs to be part of and engaged in action, and that means both to engage in processes of co-creation of knowledge, but also to take the role as facilitators of co-creation as well. So I think this is very much a part of our practices these days. In our institution, we have, for example, launched a new PhD program, cross-disciplinary, with an explicit focus on the action part in these programs to sort of develop the knowledge and the competence needed to take part in this. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. So PhD programs seems to be a common theme that we can use to educate these new scientists that we are in need of. And then I want to move to Shonil, because you teach on my sustainability courses, and we spend quite a bit of time discussing sustainability for whom with our students. And I want to hear, in your view, what are the biggest challenges regarding equality in the world as we know it? And especially, of course, in relation to biodiversity and cultural diversity.
Thanks, Inger. I have really enjoyed teaching on sustainability courses that you run. I teach 2 lectures, one on managing biodiversity on land, responding to the Anthropocene and discussion around it, and second on building partnerships for sustainability, particularly with marginalized communities who have protected biodiversity through their traditional, cultural, spiritual practices. So we know that cultural practices often promote biodiversity, but the kind of biodiversity they promote is often non-charismatic. It's the humble medicinal herbs or soil nematodes or obscure insect species that are nevertheless important for ecosystem services and their delivery. The focus of global biodiversity conservation efforts is often on charismatic species, and Miriam said in her presentation this morning that is the kind of saving the planet approach that global biodiversity conservation takes. And naturally, that's because these species tend to attract attention, and the assumption is that if you conserve these charismatic species, everything else will fall in place. But that's not always the case. So we need to be do more to understand the cultural practices that actually support non-charismatic but vital biodiversity. So that's one aspect of equality, equality between species, charismatic versus non-charismatic, and equality between people. So supporters of global conservation movement versus people who live in biodiversity-rich places. I think the challenge for making them equal partners is the power relations between those from the global north and those from the global south. So I think we need to be more reflective and develop a more reflective approach to biodiversity conservation, bearing in mind those power relations. The second point I want to make is about the Anthropocene. So the Anthropocene as a new geological epoch that signals the impact of human species on all other other species on the planet is well and good. But Anthropocene perhaps arrives in different places at different times. So in the global north, it may have accelerated with the dawn of industrialization, say 200 years ago. But in some places, arguably, the Anthropocene is yet to arrive. So the Anthropocene is not equal everywhere, and that's another dimension of equality. We need to bear that in mind when we generalize about human impact on the planet and ask ourselves, what can we learn from places where the Anthropocene is yet to arrive? What have these societies done that we could learn from? So the idea of the Anthropocene also helps us to re-examine our perceptions of biodiversity. It helps us to think about the assemblages of species that have resulted from human activities. And it also helps us to be more accepting of novel nature in some cases, particularly where it's not possible clearly to go back to nature as it was before. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Shonil. Great perspectives on the Anthropocene and the onset of the Anthropocene. I want to move on to Miriam and Martin and ask you what you think, what is the role of the MAB program envisioning for knowledge generation, and how do you think this is changing now? Maybe we can start with you, Miriam.
So about knowledge generation, I think that some of the speakers this morning show that MAB was really innovative and still for me is very valid. I think that we really need to address society's needs and concerns and questions. And I also think that we have to have the good terminology so people can see when we are discussing, for example, the post-2020 and negotiating about a new agreement that all the countries are going to commit, like the SDG, that there is a way that we show clearly the connection between what is done in the MAB program and in the Biosphere Reserve and how it fits and addresses some of those concerns. So that's why I think for me, terminology is very essential, and that there is a kind of knowledge and language translation to be made to make sure that the concerns of societies, the concerns of the decision maker, the concern of the businesses, that we are all working on that in the MAB. There are amazing stories, amazing actions, but somehow, sometimes there is a gap in this access to this knowledge and to this communicating the way that what we do is completely relevant and is part of the solution. I don't say that we can fix it all, but we are part of the solution. So there is a kind of communication, science communication that needs to be addressed. And I would say that this is something key in the coming months to make better the link between what the MAB has done and what we can offer to the different stakeholders, especially the ones that don't feel concerned by science or by ecology or by biodiversity, because we are all part of nature. And that's one of the key messages that is being shared more and more, but that the MAB program is reaching out to all these different stakeholders. And so the knowledge is going to be a key way to make sure that they are all feeling part of the solution, not only the scientist or the practitioner, but that everybody has a knowledge that can serve this global purpose of living in harmony with nature and on Earth now.
Thanks, Miriam. Great perspectives. Do you have anything to add to that, Martin, when it comes to the MAB program?
Well, yeah, it's always hard to add to what Miriam has said because it's very comprehensive and thoughtful. But I think your question was about knowledge generation. And actually, I don't think that is necessarily the key. The key is the knowledge transfer. And okay, we're discussing words here, but I think, as we've heard, there are lots of really good examples of projects going on and that have gone on in biosphere reserves around the world. The challenge is that a lot of the time we just don't know about them. There have been some global literature reviews of papers with the words Biosphere Reserve in, and then, okay, what do you do with all that knowledge? at all levels, from the local to the global. And I guess that's one of the reasons for my arguments, that we really need to go back to the thinking of MAB as an intergovernmental science program, and linking collaboratively, building on the synergies, going from the research done in specific places to what can that mean much more widely. How have we developed particular models of doing things? How are they working? What has actually been happening on the ground? And I think looking forward, very much what has been mentioned in some of the recent presentations here, how can this be relevant how can the research be designed with the local stakeholders, with the MAB, the Biosphere Reserve coordinators, but also with other people in the area, so that they actually are useful on the ground locally. But I think always thinking, it's very valuable. I'm a big picture thinker. It's good to think about, okay, it's relevant here, it's working here. How can that be relevant in other places? And collaborative, comparative research, I think, is a key part of all of that.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. And a follow-up question to Lisen. How can we realize the potential of biosphere reserves as learning sites? You've worked extensively in biosphere reserves. And what is the role of science in this regard, from your perspective?
Well, thank you, Inger. And I want to go back to the preamble of the Constitution of UNESCO that declared that since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. So that's the whole background to everything that UNESCO does. And thinking now of Miriam's presentation, and I love this graph that you put out, Miriam, where you could see the tension between loss and care, and between people and planet, and how the MAB program is really situated in that part of care and people. I think we could maybe revise that statement for the MAB program, and it would be, since exploitation begins in the minds of people, it's in the minds of people that stewardship, or maybe regeneration, must be constructed. So it's about using the MAB program, I think, to help support that paradigm shift that the Anthropocene requires us to go through, from being exploiters of each other and nature, to being these stewards or caretakers of each other and nature. But I think it's also another reconnection that needs to happen, which is the one between minds, hearts, and bodies. And I think there the MAB program also allows us to embody and act on this mind shift that UNESCO is all about. So then the role of science, I think many people have said today that it's about being participants in a co-creation process of knowledge, but also of action, and providing that facilitation of this knowledge generation and action generation. And I think a key role of science is also to help bring out those lessons learned from biosphere reserves to the broader world outside of the biosphere reserves, because we cannot wait until the whole planet has become a biosphere reserve to become, a species that lives in harmony with their surroundings. But we actually need to make sure that all of the areas that are not biosphere reserves are also learning from all of the practices and experiences in this program. And there, science can provide a critical perspective, a synthesis, a support to all of those managers working day and night to make this ambitious vision a reality.
Thank you, Lisen. That was really great added perspectives to all the other momentums that we have heard today. I see time is flying. We have 7 minutes till we break for lunch. And of course, I have a very long list of questions, but I also really want to open up the floor to the participants. So please raise your hand if you have a general question or a particular question to a particular person. And then you can just unmute and ask your question. Martin.
Thank you. Well, I guess I'm cheating a little, but I'm going to try and reply to Alberto's question about the UNESCO chairs and the MAB program. Because I used to be a UNESCO chair connected to the MAB program. I've now retired and the chair doesn't exist anymore, but you, Inger, are now one of those. And I think, yes, there is a real opportunity within UNESCO linking the education bit, the E bit of UNESCO and the S bit where MAB is found to do this. And there are quite a few chairs, or UNESCO chairs working in biosphere reserves with biosphere reserves. Again, the challenge is to bring them together. Helena is here, you are here, I am here, but again, how do we actually work from the activities of the specific chairs to bring that bigger picture together? And I think that's something to think about for the future, and in terms of really creating a network of MAB scientists, and one would hope that the chairs would be key elements of that.
Agreed, Martin. Thanks. Miriam, I believe you were the next, and then Cara.
Yes, just to make possibly a nice connection between and a very concrete proposal between what has been said today about research and young people and the sites. We have an opportunity with a new project. We have to regenerate the relationship, reconnect, but also to restore ecosystems. And there's going to be volunteer experts call in July to help all the UNESCO designated sites, not only Biosphere Reserve, but part of it, with a mentorship program for young people. And I would like to mobilize the UNESCO chairs. And what I've heard today was really absolutely useful and relevant to that program, where we can make that connection between the culture and the nature and the different methodology that you have used. So I will share with you, especially with Inger, but all of you, the call for the volunteers. So it's experts going to the sites based on requests from countries, but also with a mentorship program for young people where they can do either their master or their PhD in those sites, including biosphere reserves. And that could help concretely to make this community bigger, and also to share in between solution about the different regeneration of ecosystems, but also highlight these cultural values that are key to change, again, the norms and the behavior. So that's very concrete. It's funded. It's for the next 3 years. And I really, really would like to use the UNESCO Chair program in that, and for the young people especially.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Please keep us informed about this. And then Cara, please.
I think it's perhaps to all the panelists and perhaps the previous presenters as well. So I've been thinking, and I've seen in the literature a lot around, it's the extinction of experience that is impacting this sort of failed relationship that humans have with nature. And I mean, there's a lot being written about the extinction of experience. And I'm wondering, how do you see biosphere reserves as sort of almost reframing the way, in practical terms, perhaps that's too big a question, reframing the way humans then do experience nature? Perhaps that's the bigger objective of the program, but I wondered if anyone might have some comment on addressing this extinction of experience that failed human-nature relationship.
Lisa, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, we have done quite a lot of interviews in Biosphere Reserves. In addition to the survey that I described, we've done deeper case studies together with master students and PhD students where people engaged in Biosphere Reserve work have been interviewed about what this has meant to them. And we can see very clear evidence that through engagement in all the activities that the Biosphere Reserves offer, people do shift their perspective on nature, and they realize that people are part of nature, they realize that people depend on nature, they get a much more holistic approach. And if you come from a biodiversity conservation side, you will get a better understanding of the role of people. If you come from more of an economic side, you will get a better understanding of the role of nature and so on. So I do think that this program can help address this extinction of experience through the very practical activities that Biosphere Reserves offer. So I think that's a very important point from you, Cara. Thank you.
Anybody else want to comment on this in the panel?
Can I say something? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, sure, Helena, go ahead.
Just very briefly, I really like the idea of having some kind of this youth program. One of the critical issues in terms of when you look into the biosphere reserves and you want to put them in the center of some kind of demonstration, demonstrating that they are really relevant for our common goal. One of the issues is critical issues is that they are really very diverse. You very soon realize that you have a diversity of sites, diversity of communities, and cultural heritage, nature. So the diversity is huge, and even governance models, as you are all aware. We do have the UNESCO behind, so we do know that education, science, and culture are basic lines and drivers of, or should be of in any case of even of diverse biosphere reserves. But such diversity it makes it more difficult to go behind this complexity and show that this can be really demonstration territories and communities. And so we do need this kind of programs of networking, networks that can show the reality of and the capacity of demonstration of these sites. And that youth can be a very, very strong flagship for this. So if we could have a network of young people sharing and like kind of even a kind of, I was thinking of a kind of Erasmus initiative, not only because if you go for the volunteer frame, you might have problems because then you face the differences between countries and capacity of countries and money-wise issues. So if we could have a kind of a program where you could really share, and you could have young people switching and visiting and sharing knowledge and having common experiences, this could be a great achievement at the global. The same goes for the network of scientists, and of course the UNESCO chairs could really be a way of hubs of this network of scientists. I like the idea of Martin of having this. But we should establish or define a program of networks that really reinforce this idea of having the biosphere reserves as a demonstration sites. They are very powerful, but they are not visible. So you lose the power of these flags, and that's a shame. And we can work with them, and we do the best we can, but as Martin was saying, visibility is missing. And in such a complex world, such a complexity, you need to get them visible. And the demonstration is, in my opinion, is going to be not, of course, we'll do science, we'll do education, we promote culture, but we need networks and based on programs that are really making the difference. And one of them is certainly youth. If you bring youth, but also if you bring scientists, or if you manage to have some training, even training, sharing approaches, this could be very useful. I think we need to make these biosphere reserves more visible if you want them to really achieve the goals. And
yeah. Yes, I think we all can agree on that. I am wondering, I see that we're 3 minutes past noon, but is there one more last question from the participants? Anybody that wants to unmute and ask their very last question?
We do have a question in the attendees.
Yes, can... I don't see it in the chat, so please unmute and ask the question.
I'm trying to ask to unmute. This is a question from Dr. Alberto Hernandez. Maybe you can unmute yourself.
Maybe you can ask the question, Dagmar, if you have it up.
So it's not typed, it's just a raised hand.
Okay.
And the raised hand is now down, so I think.
Okay. Well, then I will leave the floor to Miriam, because you had your hand up just recently and you started this morning. And do you have a concluding remark before we break for lunch?
Oh, yes, thank you. No, I just wanted to make one final point about all these questions that we have raised about visibility and communication and the language and how we can, connect with each other and make sure that the business feel part of the solution and how they can feel empowered. But I think that we should not also underestimate the power of individuals. When you look at what happened in the COVID, but also in the history, there are sometimes one person can change the whole system. And we have a very good role model like that. And I wonder if one thing that we could think about in this new narrative that we are building together and talking about the youth is that the shift is going to be where to be a hero or to be cool or to be on media, it's going to be because you are a custodian or a guardian of the living. And that's the real wealth. It's not about destroying our really life foundation, but it's about completely changing the narrative and have a role model in every sector, including in businesses. And there are young people everywhere now, and even a bit older people that are ready to make this transformation. So I think that we have story about young people, like in Bali, 2 young girls, in 6 years, they stopped the one single-use plastic bag, the whole Bali island, which is very famous for tourists. So we should also, show that it's possible to change a whole landscape, sometimes a whole island, sometimes a whole country, just by the action and having somebody who is really a source of inspiration. And my hope and my confidence is coming from the passionate people that I meet, that I used to meet before COVID-19 all around the world. So it's not about fact and figures and maps, it's about people. Put the people at the fourth stage, put some of the young people that are really inspirational and tell their story. Because this is for me the way that if you are a role model, you can touch your peers and you want to act because this person has done it. So let's not underestimate the power of our network and the power of our passionate and engaged people. So happy birthday again, and thank you very much for organizing this.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Very inspirational for all of us. And now we break for lunch. After lunch, we have the workshop, which I hope most of you will contribute to as well. And there's a new Zoom link for this one. But please, I'm sure everybody's slightly hungry now, so we have about an hour for lunch, and we meet again at 1 o'clock. Thanks to everybody.
Alicia, can you hear me?
Alicia? Hi, Miriam.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm not going to stay this afternoon. Is it okay? Because I've got 2 other meetings. If you need